Welcome back, Hoki mai anō. I hope you had a good lunch. We did. We had a big spread of chicken and fruit and all the healthy things to keep us sustained over this 3 days. So it was beautiful. And we had someone very special come and join us for lunch too, just before this kōrero. So tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe e hoa. He miharo te tutaki, te kite i a koe. It's really good to have you with us here, Matt, and I know that lots of people out there know you well, love you, follow what you're doing, you and Rachel together, your mahi and what the Lord is leading you to do. And just in terms of this kōrero, we're going to be talking about the journeys of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and what that means for us as people of Aotearoa, tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, what that means in the church and what God's doing right now. What he's doing right now and what he's wanting to do through all of us. So maybe if we could start just by, if you introduce yourself, some people will know you and some people won't know you, but yeah.
Kia ora. Kia ora hana. Thank you for your little mihi and your whakatau. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Ko Matt Renata tōku ingoa. Born and raised in te upoko o te ika, Wellington. Love that place, beautiful place. I miss the wind, being up here in Tāmaki, Makaurau. Ki te taho o tōku pāpā on my father's side. He was born and raised in a place called Waikaremoana. But we actually whakapapa to Ngāti Porou, ki Waiapu, specifically from a place called Tikapa. Also got whakapapa connections to Ngāti Kahununu, ki Wairoa. And also my nana was born and raised on the Wanganui River from a little marae called Pongarihu. And ki te tau tōku māma, on my mother's side, no India o ko tūpuna. So my ancestors come from a place called Gujarat, and so we're Gujarati. But have always been brought up in Te Awa Kairangi, which is the original name for Lower Hutt. Maybe we can get into that kōrero later. In terms of te tiriti. But yeah, also my beautiful wife, Rachel, I have to put her in there too. She is Ngāpuhi. She's also Japanese on her father's side, and she's got whakapapa back to England as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Kia ora. And so already our connection to Te Awa Kairangi, I was born and raised in Taita, so I know that place very, very well. So yeah, I know what you mean about the wind. On a day like today, it's so hot in here, and I miss that. But there are some winds of change, e hoa, that have been happening, and I've seen you in these places all over Aotearoa, actually, where God has been leading you, where the Spirit has been taking you, and the things he's been teaching you over the years, and you're really generous in how you've been sharing that with other people, and being humble enough but courageous enough to be able to talk to people about what the Lord is saying. And so maybe if we start with Te Tiriti o Waitangi. What's your understanding of I guess, the purpose of Te Tiriti o Waitangi? For those who don't have an understanding of what it is, maybe the 101 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, your understanding of it and what's important, especially for the church to understand.
So I think within that question is my connection to Te Tiriti, and I was raised not knowing about it. I think that the schooling system, the education system, some teachers really get it and others don't, and I had teachers that didn't get it, so I went through the whole schooling system all the way through to 7th form or year 13, not really understanding it. And my koro was the generation that was beaten for speaking te reo, my grandparents. And so there was, I didn't realize it, but an intergenerational whakamā, or like a trauma around the reo, around te ao Māori. And so I was oblivious to it up until I switched my career path from being a carpenter, a residential builder, and I decided to go into youth development, community development. And I was at a block course for one of our sessions on, it was learning about Te Tiriti. And here I was sitting in Ngāti Whātua's marae at Orake, and this huge giant eagle is sitting on their wharenui, and I'm going, what is this? I feel really connected to this, and I'm not too sure. And they spent like literally nearly a whole day just on Te Tiriti. And it wrecked me. And I went through all the motions. I got angry. I was crying. That's why I'm so messed up. You know, that's why that's happened to my whānau. Is that what colonization is? Holy moly. And then I started to learn stuff like about the Waitangi tribunal and, you know, all these different processes. So where I land today, after all of that, processing all of that, I have come to understand that Te Tiriti o Waitangi is the most important agreement, covenant, foundation for our nation. And Te Tiriti o Waitangi, I also didn't realise, actually has its roots and its foundation in Te Rongopai. And then when you start to cross those bridges, you start to weave it all together. Whoa, God is also part of this covenant, man.
Amen. Te rongopai. Explain what te rongopai is to people who've never heard that phrase.
Yeah, so te rongopai is, rongo can mean many things. Rongo can mean peace, but rongo can also mean, to, you know, when you whakarongo, you know, rongo is actually to turn on your senses, you know, so to activate your smell, your tasting, your hearing. Whakarongo, that's actually what listen means, but it's more than that. It's like activate your senses and listen. And pai is good, or tino pai, ka pai. So you got rongo pai, which is actually, it's the good news. And that kind of phrase started to emerge out of Uihi Bay, from the Māori that were there when Samuel Marsden, he preached the written word for the first time. However, the spoken word of the gospel might have already arrived previous to Samuel Marsden. Wofruotara, te pahi. So, yeah.
So this is going back to 1814. You're talking about not just the band whānau, but the year 1814. And this is sort of 26 years before the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, 21 years before He Whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence. And we have this good news, this thing that feels good to the senses, that our experience is a good experience. That's what good news is, whatever that is in whatever form. And the written word preached in Uihi Bay, which is about, 20 minutes north, of Waitangi?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're talking about Te Rongopai and its connection to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. You were saying that they were woven together. What do you mean by that?
Well, for Māori, it was always based on relationship. Whanaungatanga, whānau, aroha, manaakitanga. And so over those years, between Te Rongopai, you know, kind of arriving, and then the agreement in Te Tiriti, there's relationships that have been built. And more particularly, you've probably heard it, you know, throughout yesterday, and maybe some people have said it today, but the influence of the Williams whānau, Karuwha, his wife Marianne, their children, you know, where they were born and started speaking the reo. And it was really through this relationship building that Māoris truly started to see the influence of what ihu karaiti was actually about. And we got to remember, our people are seers. You know, they're having dreams and visions, and they are seeing into the wairua all the time. So it's not just a written thing. I mean, that's still powerful, don't get me wrong, but it translates into the living word. So there's a written word and living word. They were seeing these things. They started to see like angelic movement, and, you know, when the wairua was rocking up, they could sense it, because we just switch on all of a sudden, eh? For us as Māori. And so they're starting to go, oh, this actually has something about us, as our identity is in this, and they could sense it. And so by the time Te Tiriti rocks up, there's like concepts like tino rangatiratanga. And us in, you know, the 2000s, you know, 2020, 2021, you know, a lot of people see tino rangatiratanga and think of the flag, might think of Uncle Tame, Tamuti, and see it as like a bad thing. But actually, the only way that word was created was by Karuwha
Now, by karuwha, it's quite appropriate because you have what they might call 4 eyes, whānau. That was a bit of a, back in school, it wasn't necessarily a nice thing people were saying, but that was a term of endearment for Henry Williams, who had glasses.
Well, you just imagine no one was wearing glasses at that time. Yeah. And the poor bro's eyes are going bad, you know, and then all of a sudden he's got these spectacles or the karuwha. And so they're like, whoa, check that out. You know, and it was an affectionate term that they had for him, and they really did love him, you know, especially when you read about the stuff that he did. It's pretty amazing.
Because he was here about 1821, he rolls up to Aotearoa. There's been people here through the Church Missionary Society by this stage for about sort of 7 years or so. And he comes along and he actually starts to, as I understand it, do relationship in quite a different way from some of the ways his predecessors had. Yeah,
totally. So I hope I'm not crossing boundaries here because, you know, like, you know, our church has whakapapa to the CMS, but the reality is that the first mission station that was set up in Uihi, it failed miserably because they came with their whakaro from another land and tried to imprint it onto our people. If you can speak like us, if you can use a knife and a fork like us, if you can smell like us, no. You know, it's like, if you can be like us, then you're ready. You're now civilized. You savages are now civilized enough to receive the gospel. That didn't go down well. No. So then they went and set up a second mission station in Kirikiri. You know, the stone house. Some of you's probably been there. You know, in the same whakaro. If you can be like us, then you're ready to receive the gospel. Failed miserably. And they were shutting them down until this fella rocks up. Karuwha. You know, he had seen conflict overseas. He was in the Napoleonic Wars. You know, indigenous people, although they've got white skin, they're still like, you know, there's indigenous tension there. He went over to the Americas, saw how the First Nations, Americans were being treated. Didn't like it, broke his heart, went back home, told his mum and dad, I'm out. I don't want to be part of this anymore. This is not right. And also being part of the Clapham sect with William Wilberforce, having abolished the slave trade, that was in his DNA. So as soon as he hears about this new mission at Aotearoa, he comes with this whole new whakaro. Maybe God is already at work with the people here. Whereas the ones before going, oh no, we've got to civilize them first. He's going, no, actually, let's learn their language and let's eat their kai and let's learn their waiata and their pūrākau. And so, you know, they were the ones that started learning the reo first and then documented it down. And so he just, what is that word called? Contextualizes himself, incantational to the people of ngā puhi there. And that was in Paihia, Waitangi, over in Kororarika, Russell. And so the people, you know, they really, really did love him, and he loved them as well. And he was teaching them in the reo. He was running his services in the reo. And it's not just about the language, but the language is the gateway into the Māori world. So you're starting to think Māori concepts now. And because they didn't have a word, well, I suppose, for the sovereignty of God, he had to end up, he goes, so there's a rangatira.
What's a rangatira?
A rangatira is someone who weaves people together.
Rāranga te tira.
Rāranga te tira. And so the power isn't from the top down. The rangatira is the one that lifts the people up and weaves them together. And, you know, and that's really where their mana comes from. The ability to serve the people, that servant leadership. So people go, oh, it's the chief. Oh, he's the top dog. Yeah, he's not the top dog. He's the one that's lifting up the people. And not only, I'll just touch on this one as well, because it's a buzzy one. We're also studying, we're doing our Bachelor in Indigenous Theology. So we're at the Bible colleges being able to learn all of this whakaro. It's amazing. And the leadership structure for our people, like our tūpuna structure, it wasn't one person leading the iwi or the hapu. You had the rangatira. And then you had your tohunga, you know, your spiritual leader. Then you had your kaumātua and your kuia. Then you had your ariki. Then, you know, kind of like our Māori king has. You've got te toki, or you've got the orator or the spokesperson. And their leadership model was always a group model. It wasn't like this one person has authority over all of this. They couldn't actually make decisions until they were agreed as a group. And so that's what I'm interested in these days to come, to see how our leadership structures are going to emerge. Kind of sounds more like the fivefold ministry to me than a top-down leadership model, if you know.
And the interesting thing is that in Aotearoa, we've got that model that you just described next to a very hierarchical model that's been inherited from Britain and before that Roman, kind of whakaaro. Yep. They're very different ways of doing things. And you can see with some of the conflicts coming over the years about what we think we're talking about, what we think we're agreeing to, and then how we actually work that out. So it's really interesting that you say that about rangatira. And so Henry Williams, karuwha, you're talking about tino rangatiratanga?
Tino rangatira. So we've got a rangatira now. There was a whole whakaaro around rangatira.
Honestly, whānau, this is gold. Hey, this is gold.
So you got rangatiratanga, which is like, it's all-encompassing of that. So all of those concepts we talked about, it's like, and then you got tino rangatiratanga. So karuwha creates this word to explain the sovereignty of God. This is actually God's role. Tino rangatiratanga. And so he puts that in the gospel. I think the first gospel is the Gospel of Luke. And that's the first time that term comes up. So all of a sudden, Māori are seeing it in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Tino rangatira. Oh, God's a part of this agreement as well.
Wow.
And because they weren't really a written people, they were always like, let your word be your bond. You know, you make an agreement. Well, that's why when it came to February the 6th, 1840, you know, Hone Heke and all those guys, they had to get up and make a big show about it because they were orators. And they had to express it from here, or actually it was probably from there. They had to let it out and go, this is what this agreement means to us. Not so much about signing the dotted line, because most of them didn't have signatures. They just put their moko on the paper and they were going, tino rangatiratanga. Wow. God's a part of this agreement. Ka wanatanga. That word only exists in the gospel as well.
Tell us about that. Ka wanatanga. This is gold. Okay.
Yeah, well, so you got kawa. You know, kawa is like, te kupu Pākehā more kawa protocol, way of being. You know, kind of like a awa flows. You know, you got this kawa. That's your way of being. You know, it's hard to put it into Pākehā terms there because one Māori word's got so many different concepts to it. And then ka wanatanga is kind of like the Pākehā term, which isn't helpful, is like governance. But in the gospel, it was used for like a godly leadership or governance, or I think it was to do with Herod and was it Pontius Pilate?
So this is what I understand, is that kawana is like the transliteration of kawana is governor. The governor over, if you think about what happened with Jesus, is the religious leaders of the time not happy with him, brought him in front of the kawana, which is Pontius Pilate.
Okay.
And so we're talking about Pontius Pilate, who was delegated a leadership role from Caesar, whoever's the highest in that area. So when we're talking about kawanatanga, we're talking about governorship, which is below tino rangatiratanga.
Oh.
So when you're talking about kawanatanga, the way of being...
I'm learning things right now.
Yeah, so is that, all these, like you were saying, he had good relationships. Henry Williams karuwha was known, and he's sharing the gospel, and they know all the stories about Pontius Pilate. They know that he had a delegated level of authority, but actually he wasn't the highest authority. And so in the treaty, in Te Tiriti, we were saying we're allowing you that governance role, but we still retain this.
Buzzy. Wow. And so for them at that time, they're automatically weaving it all together. These aren't silo moments that they're having. And, like what not many people know is the big meeting that happened before the signing, the gathering of the chiefs, was actually where they were coming into agreement. It was that night before. And so in that agreement time, they were going, should we or shouldn't we? Are we being duped here? Or is this actually going to be a korowai of protection for us?
Because the question always is, what were the intentions? I think that's a really important thing to remember, is people are always saying, what were Henry Williams' intentions? What were the chief's intentions. What was the Crown's intention? You know, what are the intentions? Because then we can read what happened according to the intention. So that's a really good point you make there.
And they were all about the heart. You know, what's the heart behind this? What is the intention? And so they met late into the night. And it's interesting because when you go down to Waitangi, the point where they gathered actually isn't marked out. It's not a big touristy attraction, you know, but there is like a little bit of a portal that's there that still carries the decision-making they had that night. And so a lot of people go there and they karakia there, have communion there, because they know that is where our tupuna made those decisions. And part of that was them turning to their fathers of the faith and going, it is for you guys, like, what should we do? And no doubt, Karuwha, who stayed up all night, him and his son, they were probably praying their butts off, interceding hardcore, going, how are we going to do this? God, help us. And trying to put this whakaaro into te ao Māori. And he said to them, look, this is not to dupe you guys. This is truly, you know, to give you guys life and to help you guys thrive. And so that was it. And so the next day they put on a big show, but really it was all of this journey going back to Te Rongopai that actually played into, okay, this is divine covenant now. This is actually not just the earthly one. This is one of, let your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And there was this dual thing going on. And so that's why it's been so important. And so what we've experienced from that point up until now is a whole lot of broken promises. And so we are, the Church of Aotearoa has a huge role to be able to bring that covenant back to life and give it its true mana that it's always supposed to have had. But what we're dealing with now is fractures within our nation. So, you know, we experienced it being done at Ihumātao.
That's right.
We saw that the reason why the land was confiscated off those people of Tainui Waka. And what's buzzy about the Tainui Waka was it went through a lot of the islands, but they were the first islanders that came and they whakatau themselves to Tāmaki Makaurau, the Auckland region. So those islanders end up becoming Māori, you know, they become Tainui. The first place they landed was Ihumātao. Been there for hundreds of years. You know, only 160 or so years ago, 60 to 180 years ago, you know, these people rock up and they say, oh, you're supposed to cede your mana and your sovereignty to the Queen.
Just like hand it over. Just
give your rangatiratanga over to the Queen. And they says, hold up, that's not what we agreed upon. You know, in Te Tiriti, not the treaty of Waitangi, in Te Tiriti it says we get to maintain our tino rangatiratanga over our peoples, over our lands, over the waters, over our taonga.
Now, it was never in question that Māori had tino rangatiratanga because of the Declaration of Independence, which is another whole whakaaro, he whakaputanga. So that was already declared 5 years previous to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, a statement of the obvious. We are sovereign over our own lands. Right?
Yep. And so this is what I've heard from being down at Ihumātao and listening to the stories, is that there were missionaries down there. They really wanted the missionaries down there because they started to be so intrigued with the gospel, te rongopai. They needed missionaries to help them understand, oh, what is this kupu? It's coming to life as we're reading it and we're speaking it out. It's like, you know, they were able to do crazy supernatural things. And so the missionaries really had a role to be the brokers in that, going to the Crown and saying, that's not the case here. But instead they stood back. And in some cases, some of the missionaries actually ran to the Crown and said, Tainui is not going to cede their sovereignty to the Crown, to the Queen. And so that was when the guns came out. That's when they stormed Ihumātao and they chased them off. They chased Tainui down to Waikato, and that's when they become Waikato Tainui. A whole lot of them were killed at Rangiriri. And it's just like all these broken promises, and Māori are going, what? These guys are like carrying the cross of Jesus and at the same time pushing us off our own ancestral lands. What the heck? And then stuff like, you know, when they were going to build the airport, they were saying, don't build the airport there, please. Our tupuna are buried there. Did they listen? No, they built the Auckland airport there, and in the process, they dug up a whole lot of their tupuna bones, shoved them into a container, went and dumped them in front of their marae and says, I'll do something with this. And so they had to kind of have the ceremony and taupiri. And so nobody knows these stories, and it's like, that's broken promises from Te Tiriti. Church, where you at? Church of Aotearoa, where you at?
Absolutely. See, now, there's a whole lot of stories around, you can do a whole lot of reading and research around Governor Gray, Governor, Cameron, a whole lot of people there who had also, they look at these beautiful whenua, so much richness, and people looked at it as resource, these lands, which was
they knew it too.
They knew it?
Food basket of Auckland. Yep. Oh, hey, prime real estate.
And so there's this kind of deliberate legislative attack to create laws over people and kind of bring them to their knees so that they have to surrender, they have to hand over the whenua or the guardianship of the whenua, or they have to hand over or are put into a confrontational situation. Great South Road is built as a road in order to convey the cannons, the cavalry, the army that was all imported from England. Great South Road, that's the whakapapa of Great South Road, all the way down into Tainui. And so many sad stories, as you say. And one of them was what happened with Ihu, the whenua Ihu Mātau. And so can you take us maybe forward in time into your connection with Ihu Mātau?
So I got accepted for a young leadership development conference overseas in Japan. It was about 7 weeks long. And one of the people that happened to be in that delegation was Pania Newton. And I could see this, young mana wahine, and I was going, whoa, she's got fire in her belly. And I was like, what is Ihu Mātau? And she was kind of, asking me questions like, so how come you believe in God? Specifically the colonized God, And I was like, I don't think, or do I? I don't know.
Because people often say, why would you as Māori believe in a white God?
Yeah. And then I said, well, what about Eo? She, I'm down with Eo. Eo's all good, we knew God beforehand, but and then we would kind of have these fiery conversations. But what it ended up doing is galvanizing our friendship. And so fast forward in time, we maintained our friendship relationship once again for Whanongatanga. So then when the police came down to the whenua to evict them, the second eviction notice, the first one was in 1863 when they evicted the Kingitanga and Waikato, Tainui. The second one was in 2019. And she says, can you please come down and run whakamoimiti down there? And
what's whakamoimiti?
Whakamoimiti is to give praise or to give adoration, but in a way it's kind of just like, it's in Pākehā terms it's church service, but it's more than that, because we've got our own way that we do it, and anybody's welcome. Doesn't matter what age, doesn't matter what colour, it doesn't matter what denomination, everybody's welcome into that space. And I was kind of going, these are hundreds and hundreds of people going down there, Pania. I've got like an assignment due, I don't know, she's like, please bro, this is the only way. We need to commit the whole of Sunday to whakamoimiti. Let's invite all the churches down. We'll get a 24/7 prayer tent. And I was like, oh. And I felt like God was going, you need to do this.
Did God know you had an assignment?
He totally knew, but he knew everything, even when we left Wellington to come up to Auckland. And thank God we did it, and we just submitted to him. And, we got to do, we witnessed so many amazing things down there. Like all the celebrities coming down, joining us. And they weren't celebrities. They were just like one of us. Coming in for karakia, Stan Walker, we had Rob Ruha, Joy Kingi, Moana Jackson, with the All Blacks coming down. And they were coming specifically for karakia. And for us, it was so encouraging because we just started to kick into gear. We had no stage. We had no lights. We had hardly any chairs. We had our gumboots on in the mud. And we were doing whakamoimiti, and the karakia and the things that were coming out at that point were pretty amazing. So you know, we ended up doing that, and it was like starting at 7 in the morning, and then you had your pai marire karakia, you know, the raising of the king's flag. You had the ringatu whānau come down, te hāhi rātana, then you had te hāhi, te opi whakaora, you had just anyone and everyone, eh? You had the Anglicans, the Baptists, just like, it was crazy.
I heard it was Church of Good Vibes.
They ended up nicknaming it the Church of Good Vibes. And that was awesome because they started to figure out things like, oh, we can actually do a karakia in the form of a haka. You know, and I remember that one brother who came down and we had a little whakatau for him. And he got up and instead of, you know, ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kāka, ka tangi hoki koe. Instead of doing that, he gets up, closes his eyes, and then he points in front of him. And we're like, hey, what's this fella doing? Then he points to another direction and does another native bird sound. And then he points to another direction, does another native bird sound. And we're all going, we can just feel the Holy Spirit vibing off this guy. You know, before we even questioned, is he a Christian or not? We were going, this fella's got the wairua.
Oh, was it Orthodox?
It was Broadox. No. But what was the most interesting thing is watching all the birds come out of the trees. This is during karakia, by the way. They start circling our little karakia circle and whistling back to him. And God was saying to us, this is the future. This is how you always used to talk to me. And then I started like hearing all these stories about how they used to like talk to the tui. You know, they used to talk to the birds. They would teach them whakapapa and all these concepts. And I'm going, I'm learning this at Bible college. Is this even true? This has to be true. This is the God of the heavens and the earth. And I just remember hearing stories about my great-grandfather. And he would be in Waikare Moana and a tui would fly past. And he would think of the tui as, you know, like a messenger. Oh, hea te kupu o tēnei rā. He will ask the tui, what's the word of the day? You know, and he'll have a little kōrero off the tui, and the tui talk back to him, and people just like, oh, nah, you're crazy. And I'm like, it ain't crazy. You got horse whisperers. You know, people got dog whisperers. You know, you look at our Southeast Asian whānau, the intimate connection they have with the elephants. You know, they like ride them, they wash them, they take them down to the river. This is the ones that live freely with them. And then you look after the elephants, and these big majestic creatures will look after you. They'll rip trees out, make highways in the jungle, help you build your house. And then this is the most craziest thing that we started to learn, especially down at Ihumātao, was the connection with the whales and the sea creatures that our people had. And they truly were a people that were whale riders. And they would ride them around the Pacific. You know, and the first tupuna to come to Ihumātao was Hape. And he came on a big manta ray, you know, kaiwhare. And he was the first one to come here. And so when Tainui Waka comes in, he's already here. So he runs up the top of Mangere Mountain and does a karanga. Hey, chekazi, haramai. They're like, what? How did you get here before us? And that's when you get te karanga hape, or K Road.
K Road.
Yeah. And these stories are still written in the land, you know, and it's like, our people were the most connected people. How did we manage to navigate the biggest ocean in the whole world? It's the biggest ocean in the whole world, and our people could navigate it.
Now, there's a painting out there that shows how we looked like we might have arrived looking all ragged and starved, and oh, look, we accidentally rolled up to Aotearoa.
Accidentally got here,
yeah, one of those paintings.
Oh,
but that's not the story.
That's not the case. And, you know, the way that they could read the stars, the way that they could read the environment, they could read the waves, is the same way that we read books. You know how we read books and get understanding? They could read it and interpret it and go, okay, this is where to go. So they could never get lost. They could always find their way back home. So what has happened now in our day, that our people fill the prisons, the suicide statistics, you know, like oranga tamariki, you know, and I understand the complexities that are around it, but why our people? You know, why I work with rangatahi. They make up over 60% of the youth justice system. You know, the younger you get, it gets even higher. And the women's statistics are wrong. Broken promises. We're dealing with the fruit of a broken te tiriti, of te tiriti o Waitangi. And so it is our job as the Church of Aotearoa to go, how do we revive, restore, renew our covenant to actually see God's Spirit move in our land once again like He already did, to the point that actually we might be able to karangata the whales or read them as a tohu. Because when that whale came into the Wellington Harbour and they nicknamed it Matariki, and everyone was going, whoa, cool, you just take photos and like no more fireworks because you've got a whale. But Māori were looking at that going, he tohu tēnā. And then, what's the tohu? Oh, well, let's pray and ask God about it.
What's a tohu?
Tohu is like a sign, divine sign or something like that. And then what was crazy is there was a huge photo of the whale, the tohora, in front of the beehive. And it was like, it just went viral. And then the whale disappears. And then the whale comes back and it turns out at the same time, the leader of our nation was hapu. And everyone looks at this photo and the leader of our nation was wearing this korowai and she had this huge puku, and she was also in Buckingham Palace. And they go, he tohu, he tohu, he tohu. What's that all about? And even Ratana, he used to like do things like that. But I'm looking forward to the restoration and the revival of our people and the way that we always were. But it's going to be new. It's going to be a 21st century flavor. And we're going to be hopefully at the space that maybe we can look at te taiao, the natural world, and that can be our hahi. That's our church building, is the ngahere, is the forest and the birds and the trees, and there's no walls that are dividing us or between us, because everybody is in this together and we actually won.
I remember one time we were sitting around the fire at Ihumata one night, and you asked the question, okay, whānau, let's talk about miracles. So that's the kaupapa, miracles. So, we'll just open it up and go around. And it was this kind of idea that you don't have to be the special person to be able to say something, to add something. This ties into your kind of group leadership, you're leading together.
Yeah, we're in this together.
We're in this together. We're sitting around the fire, and as we go around, people give their different thoughts about what's going on. One lady stood up and she said, you know what's a miracle? That I'm here. Because you won't catch me in a church. There's no way I'll be caught in a church. But I see all you fellas and you're all so different, and yet you all sit around the same fire together in the same space together. And I think that maybe my last question is, what does the church need to do to be able to gather together, to be able, what needs to happen to gather our people together as the children of God, to be able to help be the solution to address some of these issues because of broken promises? What is it that we can do together to be able to move us forward?
Well, I have to go back to scripture for that. But the precursor to that is when Te Tiriti was signed on that day, it was the statement, kia kotahi tātou, we are now one. But one doesn't mean that you look like me and I look like you.
By the way, I didn't say that to him earlier. He just said that. So if it's an echo of what I said earlier.
Oh, true.
Same way to it.
Oh, buzzy. Thank you. Thank you, Lord. Hey, it doesn't mean, unity doesn't mean conformity, that we all become one. Unity means diversity. And so you be the most authentic you that you can be. And if that's being Māori Gujarati or Māori Indian, then let that be. Because when the Spirit of God is alive in me, I come out as a different colour. I'm like a multicolored kind of thing. And that's the same with my wife. She's Māori Japanese. Spirit of God flows in her. She becomes the more authentic her. The Church of Aotearoa really needs to get a grip on that unity and diversity in the body of Christ. That Ephesians scripture that is saying, like, we've all got our different part to play. And so don't try and look like the next person, or don't try and sound like the next person. Try and be the most authentic you that God has purposed you to be. But I think what's happened, and I think Jay Ruka has said this one, is that the church has got amnesia. And they've got this intergenerational amnesia where they've forgotten their own whakapapa in this land. And so if you don't have whakapapa, if you don't know your whakapapa, just imagine if you forgot your testimony. If you didn't even know your own story, you'll be lost. You know, and it says there's a power in the word of testimony and revelation. If you don't got that power, you don't got that testimony, what do you have? So the church needs to remember their whakapapa. They need to remember their testimony, because number one, that's their belonging. Not only of where they belong to, but who they belong to. So that's important. And there's no point saying, I'm just a Kiwi. You know, where's your whakapapa to? You know, like, that's important. Number two is to know your identity. How has God made you? What has he gifted you with? And so, you know, for your hahi, you got particular gifts and strengths that we need. There is no other hahi that's doing it like you fellas. You know, and so we need you. But where you have your shortfalls, well, here, we can come in here. And so you got to know what spiritual gifts you got. You got to know what goodness you got in you, how God's made you. And then the third thing is that we'll be fulfilling our purpose as the Church of Aotearoa, to restore this nation back to how God had always intended it to be. And this prophetic word that we heard, that I always echo, is we're going to become an example to the nations of actually how to sink in with one another, but not only sink in up there, but sink in here. And this, you know, like, our nation's going to be on fire, but a lot of people are going to want to catch this fire. They want to catch a fire. And, you know, I really feel sorry for my whānau over in America, you know, all of our brothers and sisters over there, because it's like a lot of tension. But the First Nations aren't even a part of those kōrero. The indigenous people of those lands aren't even part of those kōrero at the moment. And it's like, man, my heart breaks for them. But they're going to you Māori, to you fellas over in Aotearoa, how have you worked this out? You know, can you help us? And so that's in time. But first of all, you know, we've got to bring that healing and restoration to our own nation, our own foundations first. But I'm really excited for this, because the fact that we've been having this kōrero, the amount of beautiful people that are in this room right now, amazing. So that's my last little whakaaro for that question you asked.
Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe e hoa. Thank you so much for sharing the richness of what God's been sharing with you. And it always works better when we're doing it in community. Hey, we're better together. And so I totally agree with you. All of you who are tuning in online and listening to this, if it resonates within you and builds courage, awesome. Let's think about what we can do to follow what Matt's been talking about. I think of one final thing. When we were standing out on the whenua, I think the first or maybe the second time I came out to Ihumatao in Jordan, Rapana, she had, it was sort of like a haranga, but a waiata. It was just this beautiful sound.
Yeah, it was like a pau.
Pau, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and tukua, te whenua, tukua, te tangata, i ngā here o te kino. This idea that as we declare release for the whenua, release for the people, that there will come healing, as you say. And so that happens through our words, that happens through our actions, that happens as we continue to declare and pray, God, release the whenua, release everything that's happened, clear the whenua, clear everything that's happened, clear all of the things of the past, and cleanse it, wash us clean, and release the people from the chains that our people are in. 60,000 Māori are supported by the Salvation Army through social services every year. What? Why? Tukua te whenua, tukua te tangata, i ngā here o te kino. So thank you so much, brother, for what you've done. Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, I just want to say I got a lot of love for you and the Salvation Army whānau, but also, you know, I learn a lot from you as well. And, you know, my brother Owen Paul Mana's in the room, I learn a lot from him. Is that there's a lot of people out there that, you know, together we are stronger in this. And so I just got to say thank you to you and the whānau here. So, yeah, tēnei te mihi ki a koe. Yeah.
Kia ora. Awesome. Well, we're going to have a few minutes now just to allow some space, and we might have somebody come up and play a bit of a waiata if somebody's around with the guitar. Anybody around with the guitar? Ian, do you play guitar? Not today. So we'll do that. We'll have a bit of a waiata, and then very, very soon, Owen Pomana is going to come and share with us as well. But paki mai mo te prata. Awesome. Kia ora.